Future Proof is sponsored by Equipping Young Adults for Life, inspiring student resilience, championing hope. Hello and welcome to Future Proof. Thank you so much for watching and joining me again, Sarah Hopwood, as I continue these programs for education, mainly looking at life and problem solving skills. And really during this time of huge change, it's incredibly difficult for the educational world as a whole. There's so much uncertainty, and in particular students are really struggling, or some of them are anyway. And so the whole purpose of sharing some of these solution focused discussions is to hopefully try and empower and help students who are struggling in different ways. Today I want to talk about self-worth, and I'm going to share a process, if that's the right word, that was done to me some years ago by a gentleman called Andrew Sercombe. And I'm not saying it's exact, so if you're watching Andrew, you'll probably say I haven't got it quite right, but I found it really powerful, and I have actually shared your story, shared this process, and I know that I have helped other people. There's one particular example that I can think of, and there was a lady who was really feeling low. She was really struggling. She'd had a breakup of a marriage, and she was a great mum, and I think the father was a great father. There was a good working relationship there, but she also had an affair with a married man, and it really brought her, and it was all revealed, and it was obviously a big reaction to that, and she was in a very difficult place, and really considering what her future was going to be. She had already, I think, planned to move away, but she said to me, can you help in any way? I'm in a very deep, dark place. I don't know what my future is. The boys were adult by then, so she knew she could move away, but equally it was just a massive phase of uncertainty. So I started the process around her self-worth, and this is what it looked like, and I'm going to literally run it as I ran it with her, and I think that's the best way that I can do it. So number one, you'll see how the process works, but I am actually going to share with you the answers that she gave me and how I think we ended up in a good place. And I certainly heard from her years later, and she had completely transformed her life, transformed her thinking, and had found a new way forward. Now, this process is not about necessarily picking people up once they've done something awful kind of thing. That's not what it's about. The whole thing is just helping us think well of ourselves so that we can move forward and be the best that we can be within ourselves. And I think this is a very powerful process, and I hope that you do too. So please bear with me, and I'm literally going to share the answers that she gave me, and just for the sake of making it into something that I think is engaging, I'm going to call her Jennifer. There you are, that's not her name, and if there's any Jennifers out there, this isn't about you. I'm literally randomly going with the name Jennifer, and I'm going to tell you what I asked, which was based on what Andrew Sercombe asked me, and also, what I am going to do is tell you some of the answers that she gave me. So what I did was I asked her when she was born, was she born at home or in hospital or what have you, and I think she said at the time she was a home delivery. I said, well, for the sake of this exercise, can you imagine that you were actually born in a hospital, and that in that hospital ward there are 4 beds? And so I literally drew all this up. It was this flip chart I was using as well, and I just said, so let's say there are 4 beds, and can I just ask you, if you were looking at these newborn babies, what kind of number would you give them out of 10? And this is a really tricky question, because some people get it straight away and other people don't know what I mean. And they say, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? Some people will say, well, 2 out of 10 because I haven't lived my life yet, so I can get better. And other people will say, well, at birth it's 10 out of 10 because I haven't done anything wrong that will make me lose some, if you like, brownie points. But this is what she said. So I said, well, let's say there's a blonde, blue-haired baby here. What mark would you give her out of 10? So she said 10. And I said, okay. Then there's a brown-eyed baby boy. What mark would you give him? So she said 10. And then I said, and down here there's a Down syndrome baby. What mark would you give that baby? So she said 10. And then I said, and then there's you in the bed there. What mark would you give yourself? So she said a 10. So it was 10 out of 10 was what she said. So I then said, well, can I ask you, what did you base your decision on? How did you work it out? So she just said, well, they're human beings. They have a heart and a soul. They're breathing. And also there is the joy of giving birth and having a baby. So I said, so without hesitation, you said 10 out of 10, and yet they were all different in different ways. And I said, so what mark now? So when you were born, you would give yourself 10 out of 10. I said, what mark would you give yourself now? So straight away, her head went down, she shook her head, and she said, oh gosh, a 3. And when I've run this exercise, that's the lowest number anybody's ever given themselves. So I asked her why, and of course she got tearful and she was explaining about all the mistakes that she has made, and she was listing them one by one, all these awful, terrible things that she believed that she had done. And I said, well, we all make mistakes in life, but I'm intrigued. I've never had a 3 before. Can I ask you why it is so low? Is it because you believe these are all so terrible, or what? And she then answered me, she said, no, when I was baby, she said she was burnt. It was an accident, but she was burnt round the back of her neck from a scalding kettle or mug of coffee or whatever it was. And she said from that moment on, she believed she was damaged. It's incredibly powerful. And so we talked about that and said, well, it was an accident. How could you be? And she couldn't. So I'm not in there to persuade or whatever. I just listened to her, and she just explained why she felt the way she felt. But the burn, feeling that there was some damage to her, was what took her down to a 3. Rather, some people will take themselves, if they really are beating themselves up, they'll go down to like a 5. But I have had people who even now would say that they are 8s and 9s, and quite rightly so too. So there's no judgment there. So with that, I then said, but if these are all 10 out of 10, because they are a living, breathing human being with a heart and a soul and a right to be here, there were other things that she said, then surely to goodness, whatever you were as a baby is a 10 out of 10. Surely to goodness, that applies to you as an adult now. And so she's reverted back to her mistakes. I said, but that wasn't what you said here. And I said, you need to stay with the fact that you are a living, breathing human being with a heart and soul. Not condoning mistakes and what have you. We definitely need to put those right. We need to say sorry. We need to avoid ever doing it again and avoid doing it in the first place. But I found that very, very powerful. And I did this at City College a while ago, and I was talking about Covey's 7 Rocks, and I'll talk about that in the second half, so do stay with me. And after the whole session, I had students and their parents there. And as I was clearing up, I was running up and down the stairs, going down into the ladies, just washing up some of the things that I'd used. And there was a lady waiting outside for her daughter. And she stood there, and I'm saying this very, very respectfully, but this is how she said it to me, and this is what she said. And her words were, "You really helped me." And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, I'm so pleased. How?" And she said, you told me I can be a 10 out of 10. And she said, that's what I'm going to be from now on. And it absolutely made my day. And with this girl, calling her Jennifer for as an example, I was able, through this process, to get her to think differently about her being a 3. And the most powerful thing about this is that we will live to however we believe we are. So she was living to a 3 out of 10, which, if you like, enabled her to make some mistakes. Once we got the shift in her head, and she moved to thinking that she was actually a 10 out of 10 and on equal pegging with others, she completely transformed her way of thinking, started thinking in a much more healthier way, not just for herself or her family, but for everybody else around her. So the challenge going into the break is, how can you think about yourself as a 10 out of 10?